Good morning. Sorry, excuse me. Today I'm going to talk about the biblical allusion of Adam and Eve in the Flowers for Algernon on page 367, paragraph 126. And I'm going to approach this like I didn't know that there was a biblical allusion, and then I'm just going to read the passage and how I would walk through it if I was a student myself. So the first thing that I would do is I would start reading the passage. So I'm at page 366, and I'm just going to start on line 117. Just as a quick background, we are at the point where Charlie and Miss Kinnian are walking through the park together. Never mind, Charles. I was just hoping that I wasn't wrong to advise you to go into this in the first place. I laughed. How could that be? It worked, didn't it? Even if Algernon is still smart. We sat there silently for a while, and I knew that she was thinking about as she watched me toying with the chain of my rabbit's foot and my keys. I didn't want to think of that possibility any more than elderly people want to think of death. I knew that this, his intelligence, was only the beginning. I knew what she meant about levels, because I had seen some of them already. The thought of leaving her made me sad. I am in love with Miss Kinnian. Now, I do know that when he's talking about levels, he's really talking about their level of intelligence, and that his is surpassing her own at this point. And then we get into this Progress Report 12, April 30th. I've quit my job with Donegan's Plastic Box Company. Mr. Donegan insisted that it would be better for all concerned if I left. What did I do to make them hate me so? The first I knew of it is when Mr. Donegan showed me the petition. 840 names. Everyone connected with the factory except for Fanny Gurdon. Scanning the list quickly, I saw at once that hers was the only missing name. All of the rest demanded that I be fired. Joe Carp and Frank Riley wouldn't talk to me about it. No one else would either except for Fanny. She was one of the few people that I had known who set her mind to something and believed it, no matter what the rest of the world proved, said, or did. And Fanny did not believe that I should have been fired. She had been against it, the petition, on principle. And despite the pressure and threats, she held out. Which don't mean to say, she remarked, that I don't think there's something mighty strange about you, Charlie. Them changes, I don't know. You used to be good, dependable, an ordinary man. Not too bright, maybe, but honest. If I was thinking about this myself, in some aspects, I think she's giving Charlie a compliment here. There's some positive connotation words, good, dependable. Now, this is kind of a negative connotation where she's talking about how he's not too bright. But then I have that but word, which lets me know that it's going to go to its opposite, but honest. Who knows what you done to yourself to get so smart all of a sudden? Like everybody around here's been saying, Charlie, it's not right. Okay, so she doesn't think that it's very good. That's negative connotation words right there. Now, Charlie's going to come in, and here's that but word again. So he's going to flip it around and challenge her as to why he thinks it might not be right. How can you say that, Fanny? What's wrong with a man becoming intelligent and wanting to acquire knowledge and understanding the world around him? So now he's kind of challenging him. It's not necessarily positive or negative. He's just kind of asking a question, right? Sorry, my lines aren't too straight here. I don't have a stylus. She stared down at her work, and I turned to leave. Without looking at me, she said, "It was evil when Eve listened to the snake and ate from the tree of knowledge. It was evil when she saw that she was naked. If not for one of us would ever have to grow old and sick and die." Now, part of me would have to know that this is a capital letter, and that means that it's a name, right? And unless I've been raised around the Bible, and a lot of us haven't because we're becoming a multicultural society, which is awesome, but I do know evil is generally bad. So I'm going to circle this one here because that's the illusion that we're going to be talking about today. Building up kind of our background information, because illusions, the top 3 illusions, are generally biblical, Shakespeare, and the Greek gods and goddesses. So today we're going to dive into this biblical illusion. So she said again, it was evil when Eve listened to the snake and ate from the tree of knowledge. It was evil when she saw that she was naked, for that none of us would have ever grown old and sick and die. And once again, I now have the feeling of shame burning inside of me. This intelligence has driven a wedge between me and all the people I once knew and loved. Before, they laughed at me and despised me for my ignorance and dullness. Now they hate me for my knowledge and understanding. What do they want from me? They've driven me out of the factory, and now I'm more alone than ever. This was kind of interesting when I read this back in the 1990s. There was a song, let me see, by Lauryn Hill called Superstar. And it says, just as Christ was a superstar, you're a stupid star. They'll hail you and nail you no matter who you are. And then that also, as I was reading this, a lot of you know Triple X. And so there was a song, I forgot exactly what it was, where he was fighting his own demons, right? So you can kind of make connections there as well. So now I'm going to go back into the biblical allusion where the story actually is to build my background knowledge. So this comes from the Bible. It's in Genesis 3. For those of you who don't know, there's many versions. This is kind of like an old school version of it, but there are actually copyrights out there. And so this one is not copywritten, so people can use it for free. It says, now the serpent, and in this case, the serpent has a negative connotation, and if you don't know what a serpent, and if you don't know what a serpent is, the serpent is a snake, so you can just kind of think about it like that. So sometimes what I like to do too is maybe pull up a couple pictures. So like I Googled one, and so I kind of got that going with my story here. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree in the garden? And for those of you who don't know the biblical story, the Christian version is that God made this garden, this earth for us, and everything was perfect in it. But there was one tree in the garden that God said, do not eat from. But the snake is challenging Eve. And then Eve says, but the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God had said, Ye shall not eat of it, ye shall not touch of it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Oh, you shall surely not die. For God doth know that on the day they eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So when we kind of think about this so far, when we look at this, the snake right now, according to ours, might kind of like be the doctors in this story who are playing God. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eye, and the tree was to be desired and to make one wise. So she took the fruit thereof and did eat, and also gave it to her husband with her, who did eat. So if you think that the snake and the serpent is the doctors. And the tree of knowledge would probably be the science. And the apple is probably going to be the operation or the experiment that the doctors told Miss Kinnian about. So, in this biblical allusion, the snake, the serpent, the tree of knowledge, and the apple is like the science and the operation and the doctors. And so, then in this biblical allusion, Miss Kinnian would be representative of Eve. And notice how, even in the photography and even in the film, they kind of matched the visual image of Adam and Eve and of Charlie. So she took the fruit thereof, she did eat, and she also gave it to her husband with her, and he did eat. So if you go back and you think about the story, it was actually Miss Kinnian who convinced Charlie to eat the fruit, to kind of do the operation. She was the one who nominated him for that. So in this allusion or this comparison, Charlie would be Adam in this story. So then one of the things that you start finding in this is that at some point they begin to realize that the next part of the story. And the eyes of them were both open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. And so now that's kind of one of the things that you can think about when we go back to the actual story. Oops, let's see here. If you go back to here when he's like challenging her, there's 180 people who see that he's smart all of the sudden, right? And so now it's like, well, what's wrong with a man becoming intelligent and wanting to acquire knowledge and understand the world around him? They're starting to realize that Charlie is that both Miss Kinnian and Charlie's eyes are open. Not only can you go back to that section, but you can also go back up here at the beginning. Never mind, Charles. I was just hoping I wasn't wrong to advise you to go into this in the first place. I laughed. How could it be? It worked, didn't it? Even if Algernon is still smart. And then here they talk about those levels again, right? That kind of his levels of intelligence, his eyes are open. And pay attention how that goes throughout the story. If you remember, we're going to be kind of coming up on a scene that his eyes are still going to be open coming up. How people used to treat him, and then he's going to be witnessing a situation where it's almost like observing his past self. So kind of keep this idea of this biblical allusion that his eyes are open now in mind as we read the rest of the story. So they sewed fig leaves together, and they made themselves apron. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Again, kind of keep this part in mind as we read the story. You're starting to see in the story that people are seeing Charlie as different, and they don't really want to be around him anymore. And so see how this starts affecting him mentally and social, emotionally. This is also kind of like a foreshadowing of what's going on in the story. So see if Charlie doesn't also start hiding himself away as the story goes on. And the Lord God called unto Adam, and he said, Where art thou? And he said, I heard the voice in the garden, and I was afraid. Because I was naked, I hid myself. And he said, Who told you you were naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree that I commanded thee, that you should not eat? And the man said, The woman did give it to me, and she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And the Lord God said to the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. So it's kind of like, this is something that I don't necessarily see in the story. I think everyone takes full responsibility rather than blaming somebody else for what happened. So I think that's how it's different from the biblical allusion. And the Lord God said to the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above the cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly thou shalt go, and dust thou shalt eat all the days of the life. Okay, and then they said, And I will put enmity between thee and the woman. So that was also between the snake. So then in the end, they kind of like get kicked out of the garden. But one of the things that is kind of interesting to think about, I'm going to close this for a minute, and then I'm going to open up, and I'm going to have you think about something else. So that's kind of like a level 3 to 4 kind of example of the biblical allusion and analyzing it. But I'm going to take you to a level 5, where I'm going to compare and contrast it to another culture, how they might perceive this story. I learned something very interesting lately about snake charmers in India and snakes. So this story might be told or analyzed a little bit differently had a different cultural allusion been placed into this story. So one of the things that I learned about snakes that's really interesting is that they actually use their tongues to smell. They have noses like humans, but a snake's tongue is also very important. When a snake flicks the tongue into the air, it picks up tiny chemical particles. And when the snake brings its tongue back into its mouth, the tongue fits it into a special organ in the roof of the mouth. This special organ is called, I don't know how to say that, vomeronasal nasal system. And it is this system that takes those tiny chemical particles and tells the snake what they are. So I heard one of the gurus in India kind of talk about, and I've also heard this with people as well, that when we're under stress, so for example, if someone were to see the snake and get afraid, there are these chemicals in our body called cortisol that would be sent throughout our body. And so a snake will only attack if it can smell those chemicals, and then it knows that it's threatened, and so that it will attack you. But the reason why some people are able to handle the snakes and touch the snakes, there was a picture up here. I can't remember where it was. There was like a whole bunch of children. Here we go, sitting right next to the snake. And the reason why it won't attack is because they kind of teach their children to be calm. Oh, look at this one. It's really interesting. To be calm around the snakes, that there is nothing to fear. And so when we're calm and when we are relaxed, there is chemicals in our body called serotonin and dopamines. It's like happy. And those snakes can actually pick up those chemicals, and it knows that it's safe, and then it will not attack you. So had this actually been, this is kind of more like a level 5, if we would have compared it to a different story, then the snake here would have been science. But science is more neutral. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's observing, and then it's taking in the information and processing it based on what it finds, right? And if I think about that, then the tree of knowledge would actually be the operation or the experience as they gather the information. And then the apple would have been the results of the operation, which would have been that Charlie did actually get more intelligent. And in this case, they wouldn't have had an Adam and an Eve, right? They would have had maybe what we call the snake charmer, or the person who was near the snake. And so when you go and think about that, then you would think about, I would say that Miss Keenan and Charlie, they were kind of like the happiness chemicals. They were happy with how the operation turned out. But all of the factory workers and the people around Charlie, it made them afraid. And so they would be the snake that would be attacking. So that's kind of like how you can take it down to a deeper level. The last thought that I want to talk about is the very last line that was in the story. Let me see here. So the very last line here is, "They've driven me out of the factory. Now I'm more alone than ever before." And in the garden, Adam and Eve actually do get kicked out. And now they feel far apart from God and far apart from other people. And again, you can kind of hear this in Charlie's questioning, what did I do to make people hate me so much? And so I want you to kind of continue thinking about this as the story goes on. This is kind of like foreshadowing how the story is going to go. And the reason why you also want to think about this is because as the story goes on, one of your projects toward the end is to write a narrative. And so what you're going to do is you're going to write an alternative ending. So you're going to pay attention to the ending, and or you're going to continue the story. And so you're thinking to yourself, is Miss Keenan and Charlie going to be happy in their Garden of Eden, or are they going to be kicked out and separated? I hope that this has helped someone understand the biblical allusion in Flowers for Algernon. If you have any questions, please feel free to message us in Classroom or send us an email.